So hello again, everyone, and welcome back to our next section that will be on business. So we are continuing to focus on the key stakeholders of Reflow. And this time there will be Yara Tayoun, who will be leading the session, including Charlotte Guide from State of Green, Mauro Iannone, and Alejandro Franco. So I will leave the floor to the next session.
Thank you, Cristiana. So in this session, we will basically be discussing the role of businesses in establishing a circular economy. For us to be able to establish the circular economy, which is today inherently about rethinking our economic systems, we need the transformation of production and consumption patterns, a shift from a more linear system to a more collaborative value network. What we will be also discussing today is how businesses can actually put in place or drive this transition, and how can this happen? How can this application happen faster and be adopted faster by more companies and businesses of all scales, so small and big companies. Allow me to first introduce our panelists. We have, at the beginning, Charlotte Guide. You are head of partnerships of State of Green in Denmark. You are mainly responsible for Danish and international collaborations at State of Green, which is a non-profit public-private partnership that works to strengthen international awareness of the solutions and competences of Danish businesses and industry across sectors of energy, water, climate, adaptation, and environment. You have also a very specific interest in the global green transition, which is a huge value in this discussion as well. And you work on acceleration and how to create a sustainable and livable green society through partnerships. Welcome, Charlotte. Alejandro,
thank you.
Alejandro, you are co-founder and chief commercial officer at Café Bueno. You have an experience in circular innovations using businesses as a force for change. You are also co-founder and CEO at Café Bueno, which is a Danish bioscience company using green chemistry and biotechnology to upcycle coffee's byproducts into an active and functional ingredients for personal care, nutraceuticals, and functional foods. Welcome, Alejandro.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Mauro Iannone, a sustainable processes expert at Numena. Mauro, you are Fab Lab manager and consultant in digital fabrication, additive manufacturing, and cloud computing. You are a specialist in sustainable processes and with experience in materials recycling and composite material processes. You are currently focusing on machine learning and robotic manufacturing through sustainable 3D printing and multiple scales at Numena, a group based in Barcelona. Your interest today remains in creating connections between this innovative sector and the different actors in both business and institutions.
Hello,
welcome,
thank you.
Allow me maybe to start with the hard truth question of, is it actually possible for business, which is mainly a profit and growth driven industry, to be the change driver in establishing a circular economy for a circular society? And mainly how can collaborative value networks be established in such a competitive sector? I think this is a question for all of us to kind of kickstart and then go into more detail. Maybe Charlotte, you would want to start?
Yes. So the question, is it possible for businesses, and also here we say businesses all over, no matter the size, no matter the business model and so on. And there I would say it's only possible for the businesses who actually dare to change their value chain and also value resources in the same way that they today maybe value money and the profits. So it's about thinking about these resources that we have, energy, water, materials, and so on, and giving them the same value in your value chain. And that's not all businesses that are doing that today. And it might not be all businesses that are going to do this in the future. So I think it's only going to businesses that are going to survive that actually do implement circular economy principles in their own value chain, and also, of course, in the products that then they market to the global societies. With that being said, of course, we are hopeful for the future in State of Green because we have really good examples of businesses that are already doing this. And I think the role of the private sector here is that they are able to drive the innovations needed to have more circular economy, not only in cities, but also in societies. The private sector holds a big part of the responsibility because they do have a lot of the footprint in the resources. So when they need to do the transition, which a circular economy is, they are the ones who, because they have the problem, I think are the best fitted to actually come up with the best solutions to it as well.
Thank you. So this kind of brings me to Alejandro and Mauro, who you basically are part of, you've established or are part of businesses that work actively through mechanisms that are already part of this transition. So you didn't have a business that is transitioning into a circular economy, but you've started your activity, or you do your activity within this economy, whether be it with the materials that you choose or that you work with. So Alejandro, what is your take on this, knowing that you the product that you put on the market comes out from this circularity? What is the response also with your clients? And is it more of a niche that you create, or are you able to notice a bigger platform established around with also other businesses that work in the same way that you do?
The way I see it, first of all, when you ask about is it possible to achieve profits and growth despite circularity, I see it more like circularity actually enables profit and growth. By implementing circular practices in your supply chain, you can actually reduce your costs and increase the margin, offering also, or allowing you to be able to offer lower prices to increase market adoption. So from whichever angle that I see it, circularity is just a tool to increase profits and growth, not the opposite. There was a time, of course, that let's say sustainability and profits were seen as mutually exclusive, but I don't think it's the case anymore. And yeah, sure, it might be more, or from one perspective, it could be easier to start a business with a circular approach because you don't have to change things inside, but then you have to change things in the market, in the industry, and with the stakeholders that you deal with. So the difficult part is changing that mindset when you're dealing with a lot of corporates that have not been used to acting circularly. However, in the past, maybe 5 years, 6 years, when I started Café Bueno about 6 years ago, circularity was still looked at with skepticism. Today is a lot more, let's say, not even a plus, but almost an expectation. And the upcycling trend demonstrates it. Upcycled food products, for example, it's a market already estimated over $40 billion. So it is no longer a trend, but a huge industry. And the perception of our customers and stakeholders, let's say maybe 5 years ago, they were expecting immediately either a lower quality product or a cheaper product because it came from waste. But what we have been focusing on is changing the perception of what they conceive as waste, because the fact that it has been going to the trash doesn't mean that it's really a waste. It's just been treated as waste, but it's actually a wasted resource. And then that assumption of a lower quality product or a cheaper price, it just neglects all the high tech that is going into its upcycling process. So once we have managed to educate it, especially the corporates, which are our biggest clients, then they understand the value of it. And the most important part, at least from in our industry, which is like the benefits of some molecules on a cellular level. Then once they understand that there's no difference between an upcycle or a non-upcycle, but just it's more sustainable, the quality is the same, they can actually understand the value of the product.
Okay, very interesting, Alejandro. So basically, this brings me to my next question, which was, is it more, what is really the role and responsibilities and differences between startups and big companies, and who is best suited to lead the way to circularity? So Mauro, if maybe I want to start with the fact that, if you take the fact that startups are maybe indeed best suited to lead the way because they can already start with this sustainable and circularity approach, knowing also how they do their business internally and how they lead their research and how they deal with their stakeholders. So for example, for you, in your activity, knowing that you work on advanced materials and technologies, but you also deal with a lot of actors that have been in the sector for a long time, be it the construction business, retail businesses, and others. So how do you see, or how do you analyze this switch in the ability of these different stakeholders to go for a more sustainable solution? And is it, do they really start establishing this in their practice also internally, or is it just based on particular projects that they come to you to develop?
Yes, let's say that the market has been changing on this topic in the last years. For example, about the materials we use in our additive manufacturing processes. Our clients now ask us much more sustainable materials than before. There's a lot us to be much more sustainable. This approach started from the very beginning of our additive manufacturing sector, since I think it was created exactly to not say to fight, but to substitute in a way the gross production and the gross distribution system, as long as this more distributed way of manufacturing that also offer much material and energy savings compared to the traditional manufacturing processes of the big industries. Let us be more flexible and more tied to the territory, and this is I think an important topic. Small subjects, startups, are more adapted and know better their territory, and I think this is an important topic because the 0 kilometer activity allow more knowledge and control on all the process and all the materials that come inside and goes out. So for example, our clients now ask for bioplastics or 3D printing with natural material like clay or things like this. We have been very lucky because since the beginning our sector has been, it is very oriented to sustainability and to innovation, join together a part of research and the application in the market. And so we have been very fast to answer to the request of biomaterials to the market.
Thank you, Mauro. This brings me, so every subject is really linked to one another. So this question of actually research, and because in dealing with circularity, we also deal with new technology that is advancing quite fast. So there's nowadays maybe more pressure on businesses to adapt fast to new materiality, but also new technologies that are being set and that are being discovered, be it academically or on the market. So how can businesses practically and how early in an innovation or in an innovative process, maybe across sectors, like not only in research and tech, but also in innovative processes in making business and dealing with stakeholders, how early can businesses start testing these solutions on the market? Maybe Alejandro also, because in your research, I'm guessing that you also would need a return or user experience once you launch a product. So how early can you do that? Also from a profit point of view, or in a way of knowing that this research or this product will for sure succeed. How fast can you do that and keep up with the innovation happening and the research happening in academia or in other sectors if you're in contact with them?
Yeah, I think the key for any business, circular or not, but in this particular context, being a business that, if a business revolves about circularity, cool, perfect. But then just because it's circular doesn't mean that it's good. So the business needs to be focused on solving actual market needs, something that the market is looking to replace. For example, in the context of my company, we looked at the cosmetics industry and nutraceuticals or functional foods, and then start looking at all the gaps in the market. For example, there's a need to replace synthetics and petrochemicals for the transition into natural, but then there's a there's a lack of natural ingredients that comply with the high performance of synthetics, and or have some functional barriers, or maybe price is just too way off. So if I were to go to the market and just, I don't know, take something from coffee and do, I don't know, and I say, this is a circular ingredient from coffee, let's try out what happens. They will be like, yeah, but why? Why do I need it? But on the other hand, if I take into consideration all the problems that they are trying to solve, and then be more specific, okay, maybe in anti-aging, they are trying to get rid of this particular ingredient, and these are all the properties. How can we make an ingredient that replaces that one for a BB cream in anti-aging? And then what we do in order to validate that is immediately, like as soon as we have prototypes, we don't wait until it's perfect. As soon as we have prototypes, we start, of course, signing NDAs and everything, all of the administrative things, but then sending samples to the R&D, product development teams of both small companies and big companies, as well as involving management to accelerate the process. Usually, what has worked for us in order to accelerate the market adoption, because dealing with companies, with very big corporates, the sales cycle can take 2 or 3 years to close a deal. So if we rely on them for our business growth, we cannot wait until they decide to buy to make our business work. So in the meantime, what we do is look for early adopters of our technologies, which are usually smaller companies, smaller brands that can take to market a new innovation in a period of 6 months. And that also gives some data that we can use to also reinsure the corporates, which ironically are more risk averse, and then allow them to go through with the innovation. And once that happens, we're able to reach an economy of scale, because they are the ones with the volumes, reduce the costs, and be able to make it mainstream.
Charlotte, isn't there exactly like, do you deal with a lot of reluctance from, let's say, big corporations, and what would be their main drivers to engage with these circular solutions?
Well,
sorry.
sorry, yeah, sorry. I think also, sorry for chipping in here, Alejandro. You said it earlier, like circular solutions. It's great when you want to make the world a better place and sustainability, but it also is just a question of it's good business because you can actually reduce your marginal cost in your value chain, and I think that will still be a main driver for many of the companies and also big companies, that they need to see that this solution isn't adding cost in their value chain. For instance, as you also described, Alejandro, if the price is just too high or something, then it doesn't really make sense. It won't be able to supplement something that they're using today. So I think that is definitely a driver, but we can also see that having circular or sustainable value chains in companies that not necessarily are the ones that are in the end providing a circular solution, but they are the ones that need to implement the solution, will also be a question of competitiveness, that their consumers, both B2B and B2C, will be asking and demanding for them to have a circular transition, a sustainable transition, if they want to engage with them in the future. And that's seen, for instance, in the decisions that investors are going to take, new taxonomy and so on. All of this is something that is pushing a high demand on these businesses to actually do something and implement more resource efficient solutions, because it would be a question of survival in the future, I think. And also I have a question for you, Alejandro, because you said this, it's a question of also looking at the demands in the market and maybe also for consumers in some degree. But I guess when you are startups and innovators, you are also pushing some solutions that maybe the market doesn't know that they need yet. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what can you actually, what have you done there?
But I mean, you need to look at the well, I'm talking from the perspective of the industries that we serve. And for example, if you understand the science behind, or let's say a very big issue being glycation or photoaging or psoriasis, whatever, then if you start looking at, instead of what is being done in the market, start looking at the cause of the problem, then you can start ideating different ways on how to approach it, not necessarily how the market is doing today, but just come up with a different solution. We have done this in a couple of cases by, let's say, focusing. You would think, okay, we have limited things that we can do because it's just coffee. But once you actually break it down and into its composing molecules, then you can turn them around in certain ways so that they can act in your body in the way that you want them to. So by doing that, then we go on to let's say to a big company and say, okay, apart from meeting this consumer need that you have been trying to solve, you can solve it now in a new way. But apart from that, this ingredient also gives you other benefits in the formulation, like reducing the amount of preservatives that you use and so on and so on. This is a change in the sense that they are used to using 20 ingredients. One has one particular purpose, but then if you show them that this other ingredient can provide multiple benefits, then they start rethinking of how do they formulate and make products for consumers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely multiple benefits as a lever for businesses, of course. So not
Yeah. Very interesting, because this brings me to, before getting into maybe how businesses interact with other actors, specifically policy and policymakers. I want to just stop a moment on the collaborative aspect that businesses could adopt in between each other to also engage better in this circular economy, and how able are businesses to really adopt a collaborative approach, knowing that, you know, one can do all, and across sectors we have a lot to learn from each other, from our practices, but also basically the materials or ways of making things, and adopting a value chain network that is more collaborative across sectors. Maybe Mauro, when you're dealing with on projects with different stakeholders, how does this work? Do you feel like there's this ability to collaborate and distribute a bit the practices and activities within projects more than before, where one business would want to take a hold of the entire project and actually basically get the entire benefit out of it?
In the various sectors where I've been working, let's say that especially after the economical crisis of 2008, in many sectors, I'm thinking in this moment, for example, to nautical sector, there have been a kind of natural selection of the companies, meaning that a few of them have disappeared, and the ones that stay on the market are the ones that have externalized a lot of processes that automatically generate a collaborative environment between a lot of actors in the territory or in the sector itself. I think when there is an economical sustainability for a process or for an activity, there always a pushing for this type of behaviors among all the supply chain, from the raw materials to the services. We have been watching this more than in additive manufacture, mainly in recycling sector, where I am a witness that the market can be changed. I don't believe completely that we have to create something that the market accepts. Sometimes the market changes, and I give you an example. A supermarket brand in Turin, in northwest of Italy, just because I've seen a few startups that were selling door-to-door food without packaging create a corner into the supermarkets, and it was a winning choice because all the supermarkets in north of Italy now have these type of corners of food without packaging, and this created a lot of improvements in the territory, because dealing without packaging allowed a lot of food producers of the territory to deal directly without too many passages, without this cross distribution system, to participate to this innovation.
It was more of a locally applied solution, kind of, that was adopted then by the community.
As also, I think Alejandro was saying before, the small company is more flexible and fast to give a rapid response. Then if it is a winning choice, automatically, without institutions to make anything, the market changes, and also the big brands want to join these new sustainability processes, which means savings, rapidness, mainly savings, because every time there is a transportation of material, the prices lift up. I just leave you with one memory I had in a conference when I was working into the recycling waste management. There was this guy from oil companies that was so much interested in recycling of plastics, and we were kind of surprised for his such a big interest. And the only reason was that the price of the oil at the barrel market was above $110 at barrel. Below that, he explained to us that below that limit raw material, oil material was still winning. Above that was not winning anymore, so they introduced themselves in helping recycling plastic.
Thank you, Mauro. This brings me maybe to my last question before we jump to the question and answer, because we have some questions there. Speaking about policies and institutions, Charlotte, how should actually businesses interact with policy, knowing that also most policies have yet across sector to adapt to a circular mindset. A lot of them have already established, or adapted to this new way of making business and towards the net zero emissions goal, for example, if I talk about the construction sector. But some policies are still shy to really impose policies, which makes it easier for big companies to really not adopt this circularity approach yet. So how do you see businesses dealing with this, and how can also, on the contrary, businesses affect or push policies to actually allow them to practice in a more circular way?
Well, I'm going to just highlight an example from Denmark. So Denmark has set a target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 70% in 2030. So that's our climate target. And here the Danish government invited the entire private sector of 14 different sectors to come with their recommendations on how they could, first of all, reduce their own emissions towards this 70% target, but also how their products and solutions could contribute to other sectors' decrease in emissions. And I think that's an example of how the private sector actually, first of all, supports this goal. And you can, I think, say the same of circularity. There was a specific climate partnership and circular economy. So they set up their own goals in terms of reducing waste, reducing plastics, and so on, and actually got the commitment from an entire value chain of private sectors working with this, but also came with concrete recommendations to policy makers and regulators on how they could implement and remove barriers for the private sector to actually contribute to the reduction of emissions. I know that this model is not, of course, possible in all countries. Denmark is only 5.6 million people, and we do have a very holistic society. But with that being said, I think the model of actually inviting the businesses to come with the concrete policy recommendations to make the framework that enables them to come with the solutions, because I can see that a lot of private sector, both small and big companies, they are eager to engage, but they might not have the right framework in order to deliver the solutions. So that, I think, is a really interesting example of that. And then the other way of when we look at policy is just, I think, also really interesting to see how businesses in some sectors, now you are talking about construction, for instance, they are actually more ambitious than the policy. So they are setting voluntary standards or having more sustainable, more circular solutions that are actually required of them. And I think that is a really positive sign that you can see private sector moving ahead of the public sector when it comes to ambitions within sustainability. So that's a way, I think, to actually affect the policymakers in a very, very positive way, saying we don't want to wait for your bureaucracy. We're just going to go ahead and set first of all our targets, but also implement solutions. And then the policymakers hopefully can accelerate their decision making as well.
Very, very interesting point. And this also highlights the fact that there's a need for all businesses to adopt more transparency, in reporting also on their activity. How would you see this being established in this?
Yeah, I think it's something that's not only a problem in Denmark, but also, at least you can see in Europe now, that when we want to, for instance, invest in sustainable products or businesses, we need to be able to compare them in order to be able to compare them, we need to make sure that the data that they're using in terms of their footprint and so on, their sourcing of materials, for instance, it needs to be something that we can say, or we can compare these value chains and products, and that is not in place today in the right scale, but it is, I think, something that's necessary also for consumers, both B2B again and B2C, to be able to make a circular choice. They need to see that the product that they're choosing is, I think that's also one of the questions, but is this actually more sustainable or more circular than something else? And that's very hard to see as a consumer today. It's hard to make a circular choice.
Alejandro, maybe before jumping, because there's actually a question on products and how consumers can shift from mainstream products to sustainable products. But maybe before, Alejandro or Mauro, do you sometimes feel like policies that are set in your different sectors of expertise are actually blocking you from putting a product on the market because maybe you don't have the exact the product doesn't tick all the boxes of policy, or this product needs to respond to this I don't know, even maybe specifically in cosmetics, right? Or also in the construction sector, I'm putting a certain product or using a certain building component, I need to respond to this and that regulation, but maybe this regulation is not yet adapted to this new material. So how do you respectively deal with these points?
I mean, government at the end of the day, it's like a huge company. So you have to talk to them like you would talk to a big company and understand what are their drivers for change. Of course, they have some goals and objectives that are, in this case, sustainability, but then they will never forget about profit. So it's also helping them see the economical aspect of this and why it is not only urgent from a climate point of view, but also it is an opportunity that they are wasting if they do not do it. Especially when you look at the tax revenue that they are not currently making if they don't make this happen, for example. And then as Charlotte said, before that actually happens, like they take so long to do anything that you start by doing proofs of concepts with companies to show them that it is possible, show them the numbers, and eventually, I mean, they turn around, but then that's more on a local level. And I'm thinking about, for example, encouraging the collection of coffee grounds from all companies in Denmark. And then that also takes me to the fact that humans do not react better to reward than to punishment. If you look at the bio waste here in Denmark, it has been available to be separated for many years, but not all companies did it because it was voluntary. But this year, now some sanctions entered, and now everyone is forced to do it. And they didn't do it because it was an extra cost, but now the government is like, okay, you need to do it, or like no matter what. So, and the government is of course motivated by their long-term goals, but this can also translate to other things, such as plastics, such as coffee, not only from an environmental perspective, but also, okay, if we actually allow these materials to go or to extend the economical life cycle, there's going to be more tax revenue and more of sustainable offerings for consumers.
I'm guessing, speaking of this urgency in the climate and environmental urgency that we're facing, maybe Mauro, in your sector, it has been you've seen that maybe policy or governments are or also maybe municipalities, because I know you work a lot with local actors. Are they making basically your life easier in getting on these projects and applying your new materials or or is it still a bit of an obstacle?
Well, let's say that in the construction sector, the main rules are about safety, so we're not going to change them for sure. I think every time institutions try to not externalize environmental costs, force the business actors to find remedies, and so other solutions. I have seen with my eyes that when people, also consumers, have the chance to change, also if they have to be forced at the beginning, the change in the mind of the consumer is so big that the market, the business actors follow that. We have seen, for example, that when recycling has been introduced into the cities, with not a punishment but an award system based on their waste, okay, they immediately, like in less than 1 week, they have changed the way they go to the supermarket and what kind of a product they use. They have understood just because the institution created the system of recycling, the collection, this new way of collection door to door, for example, which is with the highest performance. In less than 1 week, the habits of people into the supermarket have changed because they were looking for cardboard packaging instead of multi-material packaging that is not possible to recycle. Okay, and this led to a new perspective of savings for the companies as well. Also, that in the bills at the end of the month for the citizen.
Thank you, Mauro. I'm guessing now we have to wrap up. Right, Cristiana?
Yeah, thank you, Yara. And also thank you, Mauro, Charlotte, and Alejandro for this session. It was really, really interesting. And I really enjoy to see a different perspective from the business than the one we had before. And in one sense, it was also interesting to hear how business also perceive themselves and sometimes ahead of the public sector and more entrepreneurial and willing to have some of the barrier removed. So in some way, what we learned in the governance session when we had more public sector actors was more how we can use sanction or incentive system in order to allow and to support the companies to move towards a circular economy. It's also interesting to see the other side where companies also see, well, it's also important to remove barriers and actually allow us to develop our strategy in that sense. With that, I would really like to thank you all for this very interesting contribution to our conference, and I invite you to keep following us and keep on the dialogue as we progress throughout the day. So thank you.
Thank you, Cristiana.
And now we are going to have a break, and at 11 we meet again with a session on policy. So thank you all, and see you all online in a few minutes.